Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming together to immerse ourselves in the words and relationships of Torah. This week we are in Parshat Bo, which is in the book of Genesis, chapter 10, beginning with verse 1. We will read through the English translation of our portion. I'll share with you a bit of a focused study on it, and then we'll open it up for our collective, collaborative conversation about it. If you'd like to go ahead and unmute at this time, we can together recite our blessing, giving thanks for sharing in this moment. Baruch
Baruch Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Thank you, God, for this opportunity to immerse ourselves in words, deeds, and relationships of Torah. Book of Exodus, chapter 10, verse 1. I'll share with you the opening verses, and then I'll invite others to have an opportunity to read as well. Then God said to Moses, "Go to Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the hearts of his courtiers, in order that I may display these my signs among them, and that you may recount in the hearing of your children and of your children's children how I made a mockery of the Egyptians, and how I displayed my signs among them, in order that you may know that I am Adonai." So Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and said to him, "Thus says God, the God of the Hebrews, how long will you refuse to humble yourself before me? Let my people go, they may worship me. Or if you refuse to let my people go, tomorrow I will bring locusts on your territory. They shall cover the surface of the land so that no one will be able to see the land. They shall devour the surviving remnant that was left to you after the hail, and they shall eat away all your trees that grow in the field. Moreover, they shall fill your palaces and the houses of all your courtiers and of all the Egyptians, something that neither you, your fathers, nor your fathers' fathers have seen from the day they appeared on earth to this day." With that, he turned and left Pharaoh's presence. Richard, would you like to read it, verse 7?
Thank you, Rabbi. Yes, I know. Pharaoh's courtiers said to him, "How long shall this one be a snare to us? Let the men go to worship the Lord their God. Are you not yet aware that Egypt is lost?" So Moses and Aaron were brought back to Pharaoh, and he said to them, "Go, worship the Lord your God." "Who are the ones to go?" Moses replied. "We will all go, young and old. We will go with our sons and daughters, our flocks and herds, but we must observe the Lord's pilgrimage." But he said to them, "The Lord be with you, the same as I mean to let your children go with you. Clearly, you are bent on mischief. No, you men foot go and worship the Lord, since that is what you want." And they were expelled from Pharaoh's presence.
Thank you. And Kenneth, would you like to read it, verse 12?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. Then Hashem said to Moses, "Hold out your arm over the land of Egypt for the locusts, that they may come upon the land of Egypt and eat up all the grasses in the land, whatever the hail has left." So Moses held out his rod over the land of Egypt, and the Lord drove an east wind over the land all that day and all night. And when morning came, the east wind had brought the locusts. Excuse me. Locusts invaded all the land of Egypt and settled within all the territory of Egypt in a thick mass. Never before had there been so many, nor will there ever be so many again. They hid all the land from view, and the land was darkened. And they ate up all the grasses of the field and all the fruit of the trees which the hail had left. So
They're reading directly from the Torah. I mean, from the books.
Nothing green was left of tree or grass of the field in all the land of Egypt.
Thank you. Thank you, Kat. And Margot, would you like to read it, starting at verse 16?
Yes, thank you. Pharaoh hurriedly summoned Moses and Aaron and said, "I stand guilty before the Lord your God and before
Reminds
you."
me of Margot.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, look at her.
Jay, you'll have to go on mute, Jay, please.
Am I on mute? Am I muted?
You're fine, Margot. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll start again. Okay, so verse 16, Pharaoh hurriedly summoned Moses and Aaron and said, I stand guilty before you, before the Lord your God, and before you, excuse me, forgive my offense just this once, and plead with the Lord your God that he but remove the death from me. So he left Pharaoh's presence and pleaded with the Lord. The Lord caused a shift to a very strong west wind, which lifted the locusts and hurled them into the Sea of Reeds. Not a single locust remained in all the territory of Egypt. But the Lord stiffened Pharaoh's heart, and he still would not let the Israelites go.
Thank you, Margot. And Dave Lee, would you like to read starting at verse 21?
Then the Lord said to Moses, hold out your arm toward the sky, that there may be darkness upon the land of Egypt, a darkness that can be touched. Moses held out his arm toward the sky, and thick darkness descended upon all the land of Egypt for 3 days. People could not see one another, and for 3 days no one could get up from where he was, but all the Israelites enjoyed light in their dwellings. Pharaoh then summoned Moses and said, go worship the Lord. Only your flocks and your herds shall be left behind. Even your children may go with you. But Moses said, you yourself must provide us with the sacrifices and burnt offerings to offer up to the Lord our God. Our own livestock too shall go along with us. Not a hoof shall remain behind, for we must select from it for the worship of the Lord our God, and we shall not know with what we are to worship the Lord until we arrive there. But the Lord stiffened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not agree to let them go. Pharaoh said to him, be gone from me, take care not to see me again, for the moment you look upon my face you shall die. And Moses replied, you have spoken rightly, I shall not see your face again.
Thank you, Dave. And David and Susan, would you like to read at the very start of chapter 11?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. And the Lord said to Moses, yet one more plague shall I bring upon Pharaoh and upon Egypt. Afterwards, he will send you off from here. When he sends you off altogether, he will surely drive you out from here. Speak, pray, in the hearing of the people, that every man borrow from his fellow man and every woman from her fellow woman ornaments of silver and ornaments of gold. And the Eternal will grant the people favor in the eyes of the Egyptians. The man Moses too was very great in the land of Egypt in the eyes of Pharaoh's servants and in the eyes of the people.
And Moses said, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh said this, in the middle of the night, I'm going out through Egypt, and every firstborn in the land of Egypt will die, from the firstborn of Pharaoh, who is sitting on the throne, to the firstborn of the maid who is behind the mill, and every firstborn of an animal. And there will be a big cry in all the land of Egypt that there has been none like it before, and there won't continue to be like it. But not a dog will move its tongue at any of the children of Israel, from man to animal, so that you'll know that Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh will distinguish between Egypt and Israel. And all these servants of yours will come down to me, and they'll bow to me, saying, go out, you and all the people who are at your feet. And after that, I'll go out. And he went out from Pharaoh in a flaring of anger. And Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh said to Moses, Pharaoh won't listen to you in order to multiply my wonders in the land of Egypt. And Moses and Aaron had done all these wonders in front of Pharaoh, And Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh strengthened Pharaoh's heart, and he did not let the children of Israel go from his land.
Thank you so much, both of you. And Jim, would you like to read at the start of chapter 12?
Thank you, Rabbi. Adonai said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, "This month shall mark for you the beginning of the months. It shall be the first of the months of the year for you. Speak to the whole community of Israel and say that on the 10th of this month, each of them shall take a lamb to a family, a lamb to a household. But if the household is too small for a lamb, let him share one with a neighbor who dwells nearby. In proportion to the number of persons, you shall contribute for the lamb according to what each household will eat. Your lamb shall be without blemish, a yearling male. You may take it from the sheep or from the goats. You shall keep watch over it until the 14th day of the month, and all the assembled congregation of the Israelites shall slaughter it at twilight. They shall take some of the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts and the lintel of the houses in which they are to eat it. They shall eat the flesh that same night. They shall eat it roasted over the fire with the unleavened bread and with bitter herbs. Do not eat any of it raw or cooked in any way with water, but roasted, head, legs, and entrails over the fire. You shall not leave any of it over until morning. If any of it is left until morning, you shall burn it."
Thank you so much, Jim. Let me invite Robert. Would you like to read starting at verse 11?
Yes, thank you. "And thus shall ye eat it, with your loins girded, your shoes on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and ye shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. For I will pass through the land of Egypt this night, and will smite all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment. I am the Lord. And the blood shall be to you for a token upon the houses where ye are. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you, and the plague shall not be upon you to destroy you when I smite the land of Egypt. And this day shall be unto you for a memorial, and ye shall keep it a feast to the Lord throughout your generations. Ye shall keep it a feast by an ordinance forever. 7 days shall ye eat unleavened bread. Even the first day ye shall put away leaven out of your houses. For whosoever eateth leavened bread from the first day until the 7th day, that soul shall be cut off from Israel. And in the first day there shall be an holy convocation, and in the 7th day there shall be an holy convocation to you. No matter of work shall be done in them, save that which every man must eat, that only may be done of you. And ye shall observe the feast of unleavened bread, for in this selfsame day have I brought your armies out of the land of Egypt. Therefore shall ye observe this day in your generations by an ordinance forever. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month, at even, ye shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month at even. 7 days shall there be no leaven found in your houses. For whosoever eateth that which is leavened, even that soul shall be cut off from the congregation of Israel, whether he be a stranger or born in the land. Ye shall eat nothing leavened. In all your habitations shall ye eat unleavened bread.
Thank you so much, Robert. And Tom, would you like to read a little bit, beginning at verse 21?
Yeah, thanks, Rabbi. Moses then summoned all the elders of Israel and said to them, "Go pick out lambs for your families and slaughter the Passover offering. Take a bunch of hyssop, dip it in the blood that is in the basin, and apply the blood that is in the basin to the lintel and to the 2 doorposts. None of you shall go outside the door of your house until morning. For the Eternal, when he's going through to smite the Egyptians, will see the blood on the lintel and the 2 doorposts. And the Eternal will pass over the door and not let the destroyer enter and smite your home. You shall observe this as an institution for all time, and for you and your descendants. And when you enter the land of the Eternal will give you, as promised, you shall observe this rite. And when your children ask you, what does it mean by this rite? You shall say, it was the Passover sacrifice to the Eternal, who passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt when smiting the Egyptian, but saved our houses. The people then bowed low in homage, and Israelites went out and did so, just as the Eternal had commanded Moses and Aaron. So they did.
Thank you, Tom. And Rose, would you like to read a little bit beginning at verse 29?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. Where am I? Oh, in the middle of the night, Hashem struck down all the male firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh, who sat on the throne, to the firstborn of the captive who was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of the cattle. And Pharaoh arose in the night with all his couriers, and all the Egyptians, because there was a loud cry in Egypt, for there was no house where there was not someone dead. He summoned Moses and Aaron in the night and said, up, depart from among my people, you and the Israelites with you. Go, worship Hashem as you said. Take also your flocks and your herds as you said, and be gone. And may you bring a blessing upon me also.
Thank you so much, Rose. Martin, would you like to read a little bit, starting at verse 33?
Did you say Margot?
Martin, yeah.
Oh, Martin.
Thank you, Rabbi. The Egyptians urged the people on, impatient to have them leave the country, for they said, you shall all be dead. So the people took their dough before it was leavened, their kneading bowls wrapped in their cloaks upon their shoulders. The Israelites had done Moses' bidding and borrowed from the Egyptians objects of silver and gold and clothing. And the Lord had disposed the Egyptians favorably towards the people, and they let them have their request. Thus they stripped the Egyptians. The Israelites journeyed from Ramses to Succoth, about 600,000 men on foot, aside from children. Moreover, a mixed multitude went up with them, and very much livestock, both flocks and herds. And they baked unleavened cakes of the dough that they had taken out of Egypt, for it was not leavened, since they had been driven out of Egypt and could not delay, nor had they prepared any provisions for themselves. The length of time that the Israelites lived in Egypt was 430 years. And at the end of the 430th year, to the very day, all the ranks of the Lord departed from the land of Egypt. That was for the Lord a night of vigil to bring them out of the land of Egypt. That same night is the Lord's, one of vigil for all the children of Israel throughout the ages.
Thank you, Martin. And Joanne, Dan, would you like to read a little bit, beginning at verse 43?
The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, this is the law of the Passover offering. No foreigner shall eat of it, but any slave a man has bought may eat of it once he has been circumcised. No bound or hired laborer shall eat of it. It shall be eaten in one house. You shall not take any of the flesh outside the house, nor shall you break a bone of it. The whole community of Israel shall offer it. If a stranger who dwells with you would offer the Passover to the Lord, all his males must be circumcised, then he shall be admitted to offer it. He shall then be as a citizen of the country. But no uncircumcised person may eat of it. There shall be one law for the citizen and for the stranger who dwells among you. And all the Israelites did so as the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron, so they did. That very day, the Lord freed the Israelites from the land of Egypt, troop by troop.
Wow.
Do you want me to continue, Rabbi?
Please, Joanne.
The Lord spoke further to Moses, saying, consecrate to me every firstborn, man and beast. The first issue of every womb among the Israelites is mine. And Moses said to the people, remember this day on which you went free from Egypt, the house of bondage, how the Lord freed you from it with a mighty hand. No leavened bread shall be eaten. You go free on this day in the month of Avib. So when the Lord has brought you into the land of the Canaanites and Hittites and Amorites, the Hivites and the Jebusites, which he swore to your fathers to give you, a land flowing with milk and honey, you shall observe in this month the following practice. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread, and on the seventh day there shall be a festival of the Lord. Throughout the 7 days, unleavened bread shall be eaten. No leavened bread shall be found with you, and no leaven shall be found in your territory. And you shall explain to your son on that day, it is because of what the Lord did for me when I went free from Egypt.
Thank you so much. Let me invite Catherine to read a little bit, beginning at verse 9.
Thank you, Rabbi. And this shall serve you as a sign on your hand and as a reminder on your forehead, in order that the teaching of Adonai may be in your mouth, that with a mighty hand Adonai freed you from Egypt. You shall keep this institution as it set time from year to year. And when Adonai has brought you into the land of Canaanites, as he swore to you and to your fathers, and has given it to you, you shall set apart for Adonai every first issue of the womb, every male firstling that your cattle drop shall be Adonai's. But every firstling ass you shall redeem with a sheep. If you do not redeem it, you must break its neck, and you must redeem every firstborn male among your children.
Catherine, thank you. Catherine, thank you so much. And let me invite Mark to have our concluding reading.
Okay.
Thank you so much. At beginning of verse 14, Mark. And you'll have to unmute.
All right. Sorry, I have very small print here. Okay. And when in time to come, your son asks you, saying, what does this mean? You shall say to him, it was with a mighty hand that Adonai brought us out from Egypt, the house of bondage. When Pharaoh stubbornly refused to let us go, Adonai slew every firstborn in the land of Egypt, the firstborn of both man and beast. Therefore, I sacrifice to Adonai every first male issue of the womb, but redeem every firstborn among my sons. And so it shall be, a sign upon your hand, and as a symbol on your forehead, that with a mighty hand Adonai freed us from Egypt.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. That's our entire Torah portion for the week. I'd like to share with you a little bit of focus study. Then we'll open it up for our collective conversation. If you have a copy of the study sheet, I invite you to take it out now. And when I was reading this week's Torah portion, I really got stuck on the very first word, which is the name of our Torah portion, Bo, because it's often translated as it is in my edition. Then God said to Moses, go to Pharaoh. And later in our tradition, when we get to the mystical text of the Zohar points out that really a more literal translation would be different than go for the word bow. So here is what the commentary from the Zohar says. Why does it say come to Pharaoh? It should have said go. So God brought Moses into a chamber within a chamber, to the supernal and mighty serpent from which many levels evolve, which Moses feared to approach himself. When the Holy Blessed One saw that Moses was afraid, the Holy Blessed One waged war against Pharaoh. So here the Zohar is pointing out that this verb, bo, is literally translated as come. So it begins to speculate as to, well, why would this word that seemed to be translated here as go, really it should be translated as come. So what the Zohar here is indicating, I think, is that this initial bit of movement by Moses as instructed by God is not an externalizing movement. It's not a movement that's projecting outward. It's an internalizing movement to come into something. And well, if that's the case, what exactly is Moses to come into? And the Zohar is hinting that what God is really saying is you need to enter into the essence of what Pharaoh is. If you're to proceed any further, if you're to lead this movement of liberation that we have set in motion, you need to go into the very essence of what Pharaoh is and confront it. And so this is what Moses does. He enters into this dimension that we call Pharaoh. And what he encounters there is horrifying. And here it's talked about a chamber within a chamber, this notion about going deep, deep, deep within some kind of dimension, deep into some kind of subterranean dimension, if you will. And here it then talks about the mighty serpent. If you remember, last week's Haftarah portion was from the prophet Ezekiel, where the prophet describes Pharaoh as being this mighty serpent from the river that God was then going to engage in a terrible and mighty wrestling match with, and was going to tear the serpent out of the water and throw it upon the land. So here, this notion about the mighty serpent is reappearing. So this is a fearsome encounter that Moses has. And as I read it, it occurred to me that, well, why does Moses need to do that? And one thought that occurred to me is because, Moses himself is a child of the palace. He's a child of Pharaoh's realm. I mean, we're now beginning to see some kind of evolution in Moses's character, and we'll see that throughout the rest of Torah. But I think we have to consider that Moses himself was raised to be a prince of Egypt, and he was raised in an environment of great wealth, the trappings of power, the abuse of that power as it was inflicted upon those who were of lower caste and class, and those who were indentured and enslaved. So these all experiences that Moses, as someone who dwelt within the palace, he assimilated all that. They still are experiences within him. And so the message seems to be here: before you can begin to be a prophet of liberation, you need to encounter those experiences of oppression and power and abuse that you, whether you understood it or not, absorbed into your psyche during your time within the palace. So this first step then, in this, what I'm calling the choreography of Torah, is not a going forth, it is a going into, it is an entering. So if you have the study sheet, I invite you to turn it over. And I suggest that there are a number of verbs that are being used having to do with movement and motion in our Torah portion, and that they appear in a very distinct order. And the first one of them to appear is this word bo, which means to come in, to enter. And we see this same word being used a number of times earlier in Genesis, one having to do with Noah entering into the ark. Lot uses it when he invites to rescue for safety the angels to come into his home. And the same word is used when Abraham enters into Egypt. So the notion about this notion of bo having to do with not going somewheres, but entering into something. The second word, a verb that we see that has to do with motion that appears in our Torah portion that comes next is Yatsa, which means to come out and to exit. And it's a verb that also is used in connection with the ark. It's the verb that's used when Noah leaves the ark. And then the final verb that's used having to do with movement is the verb halach, which means to go forth and to proceed and to move on. So we see that verb most famously perhaps with the notion about lech lecha, the description of Abraham and how he leaves behind his old ways. He separates himself from what had been a false world, and he now embraces this sacred mission that he's been given by God. So here in number 3, I have some examples of how those different verbs are used. So the verb about yatsa, to go out, to exit, we see that in verse 22 of chapter 12, when the instruction from God to the Israelites is that none of you shall go outside tetsu, the door of your house, until morning. So this notion, I was thinking about these different expressions of movement that hear this instruction that the Israelites are to wait within their home for a period of time before they can come out. Just as Noah and his family are enclosed in an ark for 40 days, this period that will be the same period of time that Moses will end up spending up on Mount Sinai, is reflective of a period of deep meditation, contemplation, and encounter with a higher spirit. And so I was thinking that perhaps what's happening here is that just as Moses has to go into something before he can really be a leader of freedom, the Israelites too have to go into something. They have to go into their home for some period of time before they can exit it and go on this journey for freedom. And then here also, the same verb about yatsa, this verb about exiting, we see just a few verses later in chapter 12. Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron in the night and said, "Arise, go out, Sa'uf, from among my people, you and the Israelites with you." So there's this first notion, the first verb, bo, which this coming into something, this internalized experience. And then the next experience, this now that you've had this going inside of something, now you can begin to exit. And then finally, the last verb that's used in this Torah portion having to do with the notion of movement is the word halach, to go forth. And we see that in just a verse later. Go forth, lechu, worship Adonai, as you said, and be gone, lechu. So here's the process. It's that I describe as a bit of choreography. The first step is to go inside, to have an internal experience. And then the next step is to then emerge out of that internalized experience. And then the final step in this choreography is to then embrace a mission and to go forth. And so I have this little bit of dialogue from the movie The Empire Strikes Back, where Luke Skywalker, in order to finalize his training as a Jedi Knight, he finds this spiritual master on the planet of Dagobah. And Yoda, the spiritual master, says, if you want to, your final step in your practice, in your training as a Jedi, is to go into the cave at Dagobah and confront your worst fears. And Yoda says, in you must go. And Luke says, well, what's in there? And Yoda says, only what you take with you. The same notion that we're playing with here, that this spiritual master Yoda in this lovely saga of Star Wars has this understanding that Luke is full of brashness and anger, impulse, and he needs to master all of that if he's going to be the leader of this rebellion for freedom. And what he has to do is to go into the subterranean realm where he's going to experience what? Not some fearsome creatures that live outside of him, but he has to confront and grapple with the fearsome creatures that live within him, within his own subconscious, within his own heart, if you will. And one of the tragedies of that scene is that Luke Skywalker cut short his training, and it leads to some disaster later in the movie. So I want to share with you this notion about the subterranean experience and this notion about that being a primary step in this journey for freedom. I chose this artist, Jean Dubuffet, who is a French sculptor and painter from the mid-20th century. And you can look at his piece, it's on the front side here. But his work is called, this particular painting is called Comings and Goings, which is what I've entitled this week's Torah study sheet, Comings and Goings, the choreography of Torah, because the first verb that we encounter in this bit of choreography is a coming rather than a going. So here's what a journalist, Nadia Sayej, wrote about Dubuffet in the magazine Forbes just a couple of years ago. Searching out the underground was what Dubuffet relished in. He loved uncovering what was beneath the surface. As the artist wrote in 1967, our culture is like a garment that does not fit us, or in any case, no longer fits us. This culture is like a dead language that no longer has anything in common with the language of the street. It is increasingly alien to our lives. So Dubuffet begins highly influenced by the Surrealists. And of course, the Surrealists were fascinated with the subconscious and tried through their paintings and their films and their poetry to probe the subconscious to see what was there that was driving us to act in these different ways that were harming ourselves and the world around us. And Dubuffet embraces that surrealist approach, and then he also adds something else. He becomes quite fascinated by what he calls the outsiders in the art world, people who are untrained as formal painters or artists, psychiatric patients, children. And he values kind of the rawness of what they bring to the moment because they are not entrapped by the latest trends in art, or they don't feel trapped by the conditions and traditions of the art world that precedes them. They are speaking from their own experience in a very raw way. And he calls this movement that he begins to develop art brut, which means raw art. And he goes on to say, the real function of art is to change mental patterns, making new thought possible. And at a recent exhibition of some of his work, Jane Allison, who's the head of visual arts at the Barbican Center in London, said, Dubuffet marveled at the fabric of everyday life. He was an alchemist experimenting with dust and dirt, conjuring up visual gold. And part of what she means here by experimenting with dust and dirt is that Dubuffet would often take very ordinary materials and incorporate them into his work. And he was also fascinated with not what he felt was the high culture of art, which he felt was elitist, but he would embrace the street level of art and try and incorporate that into his work. And here's what I thought. when I read that and I put that together with our Torah portion. Oftentimes, we think that the protagonist of Torah, certainly from Exodus through Deuteronomy, is Moses, is that he is the driving figure in making the narrative work, and that he is the focus of what this book is all about. And he is the one who is leading the way to freedom and liberation. When I looked at the painting, and when I studied more about Dubuffet, and then reflected back on this week's Torah portion, I had a very different, for the first time ever, a very different thought about who the true protagonist of Torah is. I think the true protagonist in Torah, that which is driving the narrative forward, is the people of Israel. Because it's going to be up to the people of Israel whether this becomes a successful journey. They are, as she talks about, the dust and the dirt. They are, as Dubuffet was interested in, not the educated, the trained artist, but rather the raw artist of the street. And I think it's going to be the people of Israel who are going to be the ones to make this enterprise we call the journey towards freedom and responsibility work or not. And as we are of the people of Israel, it is a story that has yet to be concluded. With that, I'd love to hear what you saw, what you encountered in our reading of this week's Torah portion. If you raise your hand, I'd love to call upon you. Yes, Rose, please.
Yeah, there were a couple of things that kind of interested me in this that seemed kind of, I'm not sure what to make of them. First of all, Pharaoh does not recognize Moshe as a former member of his household, and he had a warrant out for killing the Egyptian, which I guess expired. I don't know. Nobody lays hands on him. Heard these people coming in, and the Pharaoh does not have them arrested or anything, which is very interesting to me. And the other thing I find interesting is the directions to put blood on the doorposts of the houses of the Jews, which tells you that they were not all living in Goshen, someplace as shepherds, or working as slaves someplace. They were intermixed with the Egyptian population because they had a whole thing about, going and borrowing jewelry and stuff from their Egyptian neighbors, which meant that a significant portion of the Israelites were actually living in towns side by side in Egyptian neighborhoods. And later on, when they're building the Mishkan, these people have skills. I mean, a lot of them are artisans. Where did they learn this? So this is the first inkling that there was not an absolute separation, that there were probably a significant number of the Israelites who were involved in commerce and a lot of other stuff, and who lived in Egyptian neighborhoods.
Wow, that's great, Rose. Thank you so much for reminding us of that mixture, the intermingling of Israelite and Egyptian, and the significance of placing the blood on the lintel. I want to see if other people want to say something about that, and then I'll come back to it. So thank you for mentioning that. Let me call upon Mark and Martin and Kath. Mark Thompson.
Yes, thank you. To follow up on what Rose's comments were, how the Israelites were intermingled with the Egyptians. This is the first time that I've read a different meaning of the word borrow. I always thought it was strange that they would be borrowing gold and silver, and then, well, what are they going to do? Somehow return it to them at some point? But the word actually is not borrow in Hebrew, it's yishelu, which is ask. So they must have had some kind of a relationship with the Egyptians so that they would feel free to ask their neighbors if it would be possible. Even though it sounds strange, why would they be willing to give them gold and silver? They must have had some kind of affection for their Israelite neighbors for them to be able to do something like that.
Yeah, let me just follow up on that little point, Mark. So your notion about asking, let's just play out how that could be actually vocalized. It could be vocalized as, would it be possible for you to give me some of your silver? Or would it, or it could be more like, are you going to give me your silver or not? Right. So there are different ways to vocalize what that asking might have been like. But you're right. It definitely, because of the Hebrew, there's a notion about there is a question in there. And it is as if it is giving the Egyptians an opportunity to choose an answer, to respond in some kind of way. So thanks for bringing that up. Thank you. Let me call upon Martin, and then Kath, and then Dave and Catherine. Martin, please.
Okay. I was interested in your notion that the Israelites were the main protagonists in the story, and I would like to alter an alternative idea, which is that God is the main protagonist because he selects Moses. He tells him exactly what to do and where to go. He dictates every single act that is going to take place. He defines the narrative completely. And actually, to the best of my knowledge, no Israelite says anything in Exodus.
Well, there is some, it's interesting, there is some, if you look at this, a painting, before our session started, Richard here said it reminds him of a hive, something kind of teeming, and many commentators say that the opening of the book of Exodus in particular has language reflective of the story of creation with a teemingness, and that we do have there is a sense in which the Israelites are trying to speak. They are moaning and groaning, and there's a gutturalness about it, as if they are somehow trying to evolve into a being that is capable of articulation and are capable of not only articulation, but capable of hearing. And so I appreciate what you're saying. And if you think about Torah as being more than the 5 books of Moses, if you think of it as being an ongoing story about the journey towards what it means to be a fully developed human being and a fully developed responsible community, what the lesson we get from the readings that the rabbis present to us is that gradually God disappears as a directive character in these stories. And so perhaps in that sense, if we look at Torah as being more going beyond the boundaries of the book of Deuteronomy and as a much bigger saga, then God begins to be less of a, as you call it, a directive character, and becomes more embodied or not in the people themselves. So thank you so much. Let me call on Catherine. Yeah. Go ahead and unmute, and then I'll call on Kat.
Yeah. This is just an impression. If you look at the painting long enough, what it yields to us are faces of people, many faces. And so I'm thinking of what you're saying, the people of Israel, sort of trying to emerge from this situation. And some of the faces are disfigured, some of the faces are more expressive. So I was really struck by that.
Thank you, Catherine. Yeah, I thank you for bringing us back to the painting as well. This notion of a teeming bit of unformed entity or entities. And then is it possible that out of that, something more coherent may evolve? That's the challenge. So let me call upon Kath, and then Richard and Dave and Robert and David Susan. So Kath.
I was curious about with the putting the blood on the
Lentil, yeah.
doors, well,
Yeah.
the lintels the
Yeah.
top and the posts are the side. And this is also where the directive comes of binding your hands and your forehead.
Hmm.
And
Oh,
it seemed like there was a connection because our arms are that, and because otherwise, is it the chakra? Is it, I mean, there's that whole thing, but I just was struck that connection maybe.
so you're saying that this notion about lintels, doorposts, that's creating a form
Mhm.
that is that's meant to be symbolize the human structure.
Well, in that all of this, there's all this section about remembrance and Passover and
Mhm.
remembering this time, that maybe part of the remembering of the blood that's part of the whole process is this
Interesting.
binding, aware all the time, putting that on.
Well, and then when we get later in Torah, when we get to the different rituals within the temple, and there will be some blood that will be on, on different parts of the body and so forth. So that's interesting. You brought that up. Let me call upon Richard, and we'll get to Dave and Robert and the Phillips.
Just a couple of things. I'll try to be brief, but the one thing about the blood, it made me think, of course, of all the stuff in last week's portion about blood. And oh no, don't kill those people. They've been circumcised. So and when you said that, and this was, I saw this as the subway platform on the A line in New York City, a throng of people, indistinguishable as individuals, poor in the depths of the belly of our caste system, and trying to free ourselves and govern as free people. And maybe God, what is this world about if it's not about God wanting to be everywhere and see all this stuff and do things and create human beings, and it's not working out for him. And he's doing this thing to show Israel. In here, he states, I'm doing this to show you that I'm the one that can do it. He's not punishing the Egyptians when it starts. It's doing it for the sake of getting the attention of the Jews. He's picked them out. And about when you talked about the business of the shopkeepers and artisans and so forth, there's one little line in there that tells me something, that when Pharaoh says Egypt is lost, something has befallen, and already they're ready to go out and worship with the Jews or something. He lets them go. Why? Because Egypt is gone. They've lost their hierarchy. Something's troubling them deeply. And I think that's why the Jews wanted to go out to emanate. You said emerge. Well, isn't that the same root as emanate? From the nothingness of this not, to emanate and bring some beauty into the world and respect one another in the diversity. So I think this is at the end of the slave period, clearly, and he's letting them go. You take the horses, take everybody, just go. And then he changes his mind again, chases after him, and stuff ensues. But this is the point when the structure of Egypt as a dominion is failing.
Yeah, it's a crumbling of
crumbling empire.
A crumbling empire. Thank you, Dave, and then Robert, and then David and Susan.
Well, I kind of think about this, and I think a lot of time has been eliminated in this story. Remember, supposedly this started about, what, 430 years ago, when Joseph and his clan were given permission to set up in the Pharaoh's land, and they prospered for many, many years, and they were happy, they paid their taxes. And I kind of relate that to our country. What was our country like 400 years ago? And then suddenly an evil leader appears. This is the Pharaoh who did not know Joseph. And everything just changed. Everything just was turned on its head. And this is kind of what I see in this parsha, and the last one also.
So what I'm hearing from you, Dave, is it is in part kind of a lesson about if Joseph is the outsider who comes into a culture to rescue it and to help it prosper, turning one's back on that outsider is leads to this downward spiral for the country itself. Is kind of the theme that you're getting at?
No, everything was great till about 30 years ago from the present, when the spiral started, when this Pharaoh, who, what do they say, knew not Joseph,
right,
didn't know what happened before. And that's when he just turned everything on its head, turned everything upside down. Instead of allowing the people the Jews, the Israelites, to be prosper and pay their taxes, he suddenly decided to make slaves out of them. Look, we have free labor here. Let's put them to work. We don't have to pay them. And they didn't meet their expectations, so they doubled down on it and made it worse. And
paid the price for it.
That's right. And till the point where it came unbearable. And of course, you might say this is all God's plan in the first place, in order to give the Torah to the Israelites. They had to go through this period of, what can I say? I don't want to use the word growing up, but this gauntlet. They had to go through this gauntlet, I think.
Wow. Thank you, Dave.
Up to that point.
Thank you so much. I'll get to you, Margot, but first let me call on Robert, and then I'll go to David and Susan, and then Margot. So Robert, please.
Thank you. Thank you for a lovely evening. So there's so many ways to look at things. Regarding protagonist, a spring wind comes and it blows a leaf. One man sees the leaf being blown. Another man sees the wind behind it. The other thing that comes to mind is that we're talking at a period when idolatry was quite prevalent, and to learn monotheism was still a challenge for humanity. And we see as that march of spiritual evolution of humanity moves forward, monotheism has been easily accepted. And yet now we see we've accepted monotheism, and in many ways there's a movement towards idolatry. That idolatry is attachment, whether it be materialism, vain imaginings, the idea that happiness is a material thing versus a spiritual thing. There's so many gods that we can choose. The third thing is, I always love your selections in art. I would never, ever define art. I write poetry, but I would never define rigidly what poetry is. So one of the things that comes to mind is that he very narrowly defined poetry, but he not once mentioned beauty, which is an attribute of God. So I can see what he is saying. I disagree entirely with his premise. And thank you. This is a lovely evening. We need 2 hours more tonight because we could really get into this.
This is great. Thank you so much, Robert. Oh, beautiful. David and Susan, and then Margot.
So, starting with Bo, which is translated in most of our translations as go, and it's really come into Pharaoh. It's a very interesting and kind of confusing and complicated Torah portion. And you, as you get to the end, and I'm not sure, but it seems to me that maybe this is the first time that Adonai has given instructions to all of the Hebrew people as to what they were supposed to do. That they all had to eat the lamb, they had to put the marks on their lintel and on their doorposts, and they had to stay there, and they had to eat it, and how they had to eat it, and they needed to go and ask for gold and silver for. And it seems like so much of it is like a setup for what's going to come next for the Exodus, and they need the gold and silver to make the Mishkan. And there's just so much of it that's so intriguing and so puzzling. And then you did this art piece, connected it with this portion, and not only is it really intriguing to look at and see all these teeming faces and people and dogs and cats, but I looked up how he created this whole artwork, and you take things and put them underneath the canvas, and then you paint over it, and then you scratch out what you do and don't want. So it's all, again, kind of, and one of the things I see in this painting is that it's a puzzle.
Ah,
That's what I was going to say.
and so say a little bit more about that it's a puzzle. Yeah.
Well, the pieces, they look like puzzle pieces.
The jigsaw puzzle.
Jigsaw puzzle pieces.
Yeah, jigsaw puzzle pieces.
That have to be put together to create a cohesive whole.
Ah,
And he creates
That's
the
what I was going to say.
in something very different from that by scraping away.
But look at they look like jigsaw puzzles. So you've got this myriad of disparate pieces that have to be fit together to make a cohesive whole.
so this is beautiful. So let me just play a little bit more, Margot and Susan, both about this notion about a puzzle. So who puts together the puzzle?
I hope God.
My wife. She's a big jigsaw puzzle addict.
You were.
You know,
It's our task. It's our challenge.
Our challenge is to
yeah.
come together.
So we have here we have here verses that are in our Passover Haggadah, right? When your children ask you, what do you mean by this rite? That's one of the questions, right? That one of the children asks. It's meant to be it's meant to be a source of provocation. When the child asks that at the Passover Seder, the real response is not to be an elder saying, well, this is what it says. Let me tell you what it says in the book, okay? The child is really disturbing the moment. The child is acting as a disruptor by saying, wait a minute, what do you mean by this rite? And so in a sense, I love this notion about the puzzle, because we think that the puzzle has all been put together. We know that we're supposed to light candles for Shabbat. We know we're supposed to rest on Shabbat. We know that we're supposed to show up in Sukkot and build a sukkah. We got all these pieces of the puzzle that have supposedly been put together for us over hundreds and thousands of years, right? But what the Passover Seder is telling us is every year you got to throw the pieces up and start all over again. Because if you don't put together the puzzle, if all you do is look at the picture and say, oh, isn't that interesting? It's a finished puzzle. then we are back in Egypt. Then we're back in no longer being responsible, creative human beings. We're being passive. We're being passive recipients. We're being enslaved in some kind of a different way than they were in Egypt, but still we're being enslaved. And so I love this notion that you're both bringing up about this puzzle and this notion about what the verse that we just read from this week's Torah portion indicates that at least once a year, you got to throw all the pieces out on the table, and together around the table, start putting it back together in a way that makes meaning, not for back then, but for right now. So,
And isn't that an example of what we're supposed to do with the Torah?
that is what we're supposed to do with the Torah. The Torah is supposed to be an ongoing puzzle that is provocative and mystifying and destabilizing, and it's an invitation to create meaning. It's not an invitation to sit there and receive preconceived meaning. Yeah.
I just got to say, I love the wicked child.
Okay. So, and just for that piece, and there's so much conversation that I know we could continue with. I want to respect the time and how much time you've already put in. Just one word about the wicked child, which of course comes out of the mouth of David Phillips. But is that one of the great Kabbalists, one of the great mystics of our time, known as the Ari, said, when you look at the four children in the Haggadah, well, of course, the wise child is considered the most worthy of them all, because the wise child is not someone who has a lot of information. The wise child is someone who understands how to read a situation, how to process a situation, and how to make sense and meaning out of any given moment. That's what wisdom is about. And they already said the second most important child is what's known as the wicked child, because that wicked child, the one who asks this question, is there to disturb us and to force us to take responsibility for this tradition, to create meaning for ourselves, and to make ourselves be actors in the world and not merely passive recipients of a past world. So it's so exciting to do that with all of you, to be involved in both this disruptive throwing up of puzzle pieces and to be engaged in the process of putting puzzle pieces back together. And who knows, especially when you have something like this, it may well be that we put them together in ways that were never put together before. So I want to thank everyone. We have so much passion and energy and curiosity. Let's bring it back to our next gathering, where we begin Bishalach, to begin to enter the sea, cross the sea, and see what happens with that adventure. Thank you so much. God bless you all. Look forward to being with you next time.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Shabbat shalom.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.